Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for a conversation regarding establishing a data analytics program at your company. My name is Meredith Piatti. I go by Mary. I'm a principal in the internal audit group. I've been with the firm for 15 years, and right when I started from college, I started in our data analytics program, which back then was mainly in helping with general ledger analysis for the financial audit. But since that time, we've really evolved the program to include model validations and incorporating data analytics. And I now oversee those two areas of focus. And with me is Brian.
Everyone. Brian Irvin, I'm manager at the internal audit group as well. I've been with Wolf for 8 years now and helping Mary with that data analytics program and growing from those model validations, how we can implement internal data analytics as a consulting service within our internal audits.
So the themes we're going to hit on during our conversation today is really an introduction to what data analytics means in the world today, addressing some common pitfalls that companies run into when they're starting these programs, and then really some key pointers and tips on how to develop a program at your company. So first, I thought we needed to just lay the foundation. Data analytics is one of those terms that means a lot of different things to different people. It can mean different things related to what industry you're in or where you sit within a company. Data analytics has the potential to help the first line and managers in their daily functions and assessing where they're currently at with their business operations and where they want to go. It can help the second line in monitoring compliance with controls and that controls are working effectively. And it can help internal auditors get through their audit work in a timely fashion. So all these words can be relevant. It really depends on where you sit and what you're looking to do with it. Also, data analytics isn't a new term. It's something we've been talking about since at least the early 2000s. Probably some people were talking about it in the late 1990s. And companies have been working to make it a successful program. Now, given the fact that it's been around for all this time and is something that's highly sought after by so many, you'd think we'd have it nailed down by this point. But as you can see by these stories from VentureBeat, New Vantage Survey, and Gartner, we're unfortunately just not there. Growing up, I always wanted to be a wizard or a magician. I often played around at magic trips, and I guess I finally succeeded in this because if you look at the Gartner survey, it says that 80% of AI projects or data analytics projects still remain as this shrouded entity, something that people don't understand and don't really understand how it's going to help their organization. And if you look at these other surveys, it's just, although these projects are in place to start with data science and data analytics, they're just not seeing the returns that they should be. And I think part of the issue there is really the mindset that people go into starting data analytics with. There's some different elements that really need to be foundationally there in order for it to be successful. And unfortunately, due to some outside pressures, maybe rushing or other things, they're just not set up for success. So I'm going to turn it over to Brian to walk you through some of those common pitfalls.
Like Mary mentioned, implementing a data analytics program doesn't happen overnight. This is a large process that really takes, an investment of years, an investment in technology and an investment in your people. As a result, there's 5 real common pitfalls we'll go through here, and some will have some later slides to give you some more context. But each one of these can, at worst or at best, maybe they'll slow down your data implementation. And at worst, they could, derail the program in its entirety. So it's really important when you're setting out to develop this program that you have each of these in mind and, the ways you can potentially address them. The first one we have here is, perceived need to be using data analytics. It seems like every presentation, every conference, every training I've gone to in the past few years have had big data, artificial intelligence, machine learning, data analytics. And as a result, it's, causing a lot of people at all levels to say, how am I using my data? Do I need to be using data analytics? What can I just, push in to say I'm using data analytics? And in some cases, it's not appropriate. There may be times when data analytics won't be helpful for you, and it's best to not force it. Ultimately, it's going to cause a lot of frustration. It's going to cause a waste of resources, and it really may turn off the organization, or at least that particular individual, to trying to use data in the future when maybe there's a more mature program or a better need for it. Another big one, unengaged and absent shareholders. I think it's, no surprise when implementing some of this scale, there needs to be some kind of executive sponsor, but it doesn't stop there. It's going to require collaboration from all lines of the business. This is, important to make sure IT is on board. They are, in many cases, the gatekeepers to data. They know the systems, they know how to access the data, they know what data is available. It's important that, you have data individuals as well. That's a different skill set, knowing how to create a model, what data you may need to get in, and how to upkeep that, how to actually pull out meaningful insights and reports that can then be used. And it's important to have business line management involved too. They have the most knowledge of what's going on, maybe what problem needs to be solved, and what assumptions that we'll talk about a little later might need to be pulled in there as they're doing it. Ultimately, oh yeah, Mary.
Brian, I think that is such a good point, and that those three critical areas of the function really need to be going together, rowing together in the same direction. You need to have the C-suite people with their political or financial backing to really support the program. You need IT to understand the prioritization and grant the access, and you need those business owners to have their experiences and needs clearly articulated, and all really rowing in the same direction to have those. So I think that point is so well articulated.
No, and Mary, I think that's also, great. You mentioned rowing, and I think it's really important that, making sure that future editions also are kind of in line with that program. It may work today, but what systems are we looking at maybe in 2 years that now will they implement with our data analytics program? Is this going to be something counterproductive and we wasted all this time? So it's really important to have, the captain of that boat ready, willing, and able to say, this is something we're committed to.
Yeah, it's definitely a continual process.
Absolutely. And I think that, gets us into some of the unrealistic expectations too. You mentioned wizardry. I know I always waited for my letter from Hogwarts. I found out a few years later, it's actually a letter from Wolf. But I think a lot of people still view data analytics as this black box. We're going to shove all these numbers in there, and like magic, something's going to come out that is going to, save me all this money, solve this extreme problem I've been having. That's just not the case. It requires a lot more than that. It's getting the right tools. It's getting the right people. It's making sure you have tempered expectations. We're trying to solve one problem at a time, or maybe glean one insight that will help us to grow our business. And then building on that, maybe that small one isn't it, but the next one is going to be incrementally better and incrementally better, and having that real idea of it's an incremental process. We're going to learn a little more each time. We're going to get a little better each time. Another one we're going to talk about in detail, so I'm just going to leave it kind of here, is inaccessible or bad data. But as you would guess, in a data analytics program, data is the core. With bad data, we can't do really anything despite having all the right people in place. And then weak assumptions. As I mentioned, there's a lot of skill sets needed. A data analyst may be very skilled at creating a model for you, but if they don't know what assumptions to apply to that model, the outputs really may provide no value at all, or in fact, give a counterproductive result that you're now working off this, and ultimately the answer was not right because they just didn't have that understanding. So, it's having all those business lines in place. So this is kind of an interesting graphic that shows us really all those skills that are required. And ultimately, it can be broken into technical and analytical and business and communication. And I think really it shows it as two individuals here, but it's not necessarily just that. It can be, people from every line of the business, people from every team, but it's people working together. And that's the key for this. It's having, as we mentioned, the C-suite individuals who can give you the business knowledge, can tell the story, can really say what the data is saying and how it applies to their business. It's having those technical individuals who, know what data is available, how to pull that data, how to maybe modify what they're storing to get additional data points that are needed. And then really it's that, technical skill of being able to pull all that into your data tool and get it to tell, the story that it's meant to tell. It may not be forcing a viewpoint on it, but at least knowing what the answer to the question being asked is. I think some, institutions may expect that they bring in one data analyst, one data scientist, and they're just on their own, go off like a rocket ship and implement this whole program. And I think, Mary, you've seen that's just not the case.
I think it's a really difficult strategy to employ. And it's funny, I've looked at this graphic for a number of years now, and I've never quite saw it the same way that you're describing it, as two different individuals, but it is really identified as that way with this blurring in the middle, which I think is such a neat concept. And I do think it is great if you can find an individual with one skill that does merge both of these sides. I think we so often stress the left side when we start thinking about data analytics, but all your points about making sure that they understand the business need and the business objectives and the assumptions that are so critical are so important. So I've never noticed the middle graphic where those two individuals are kind of blurring together to one. And maybe that's what we're shooting for in life, to help cross train and educate both sides so that they bring some skill sets from each side to the table.
Oh, absolutely. I think having those conversations to be able to start at least implementing a little more, how would the business acumen side look at it, or, technically what would my expert need to pull it? It's, definitely a collaborative process. But now we're going to talk a little about bad data. There's a lot of things when it comes down to data, but really, the two buckets you're often going to see is data accessibility and data availability. When we're talking data accessibility, this is actually gaining access to the data your institution has. Often, like I said, IT can kind of be the gatekeeper to that. So getting them on board with the data process is actually pretty critical. Without their buy-in, you're not really going to have any data to analyze. We'll often see that they may not know how data resides or where it is, but that's working through the process. The other side that you're going to see 47% here had other issues with is data availability. This is when you're looking for data that just doesn't exist. Whether it's data points that maybe not previously captured, data points the system can't actually capture, or data that maybe you need to pull in from additional sources. It's really driving some of the customizable and flexible solutions that you're seeing come online. A system implemented 10 years ago now really just doesn't have a lot of the capabilities you need to be able to use it for data analytics. It may be there's not enough data being captured or the wrong data being captured because it wasn't considered at that point. So it's really important that when you're looking at new solutions, looking for those, you're kind of looking at these elements. The other side of it too is, sorry, Mary.
Oh, I was just going to say, another thing that always comes to mind when thinking about data elements not currently being captured is, historically in financial institutions probably get a little bit of a bad rap for all their grandfather data, new systems, merger and acquisitions. But I mean, the speed of acquisitions across all industries at this point is getting to be a neck-breaking pace. So I think this is industry agnostic, where data is being merged from two different entities, and how to have an effective data program that does capture it across, and what you're doing when you bring in new companies. And that term of grandfathering data really needs to no longer be in existence. If you want to use it, you need to have an equal foundation across all your data so that you can use it to its highest potential.
I think the last one here too is very interesting. We say that a data program takes years and years to put into place, and there are ways to shortcut that a little bit. Cut down the time, and that involves using consultants who may be experts at this. And that really confidentiality and privacy concerns is a huge one in terms of getting data there. You may be able to find the right partner that's going to help you out with this. But if your institution or your company has these restrictions on what data can be given and whatnot, you'll have a lot of issues trying to ever find some meaningful insights from this. So it really, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. And even this, one pitfall we say is just data availability is in its own right another 5, 10, 15 different pitfalls that could really derail your program early on. But Mary, I guess what can you tell us about the right data as well?
I think the right data is a mixture of data ethics is a big topic that's being talked about. So having a clear data strategy, I really think is the first building block that you need to have in place. Having a clear data program, required field, formatting of field, and whatever IT controls you can put in place to make sure that you've got consistency and good data right at the starting point is probably step 1 and 2 that I would pursue. But it's an ever evolving landscape with everything that's going on regarding different states and countries' privacy concerns. And again, what we need to do to be in line with those. So it's definitely a hardy undertaking all in itself, not to mention that it's such a critical starting component for data analytics on its own. So when you're thinking about the right programming and the right data, you really want to have a good foundational start. And part of that does start with having a clear data program set up. And I would encourage all companies to use whatever IT and technical controls they can at the start to really make sure the data is coming in and onboarding in the format and fields that are critical to your later operations. That is very first item. It'll stop a lot of future headaches. Now, with all we've been talking about, clearly, most companies aren't starting today with data. Data has been being collected for decades and decades at this point. And certainly prior to the start of your data program, you're going to have some data that you want to rescue, we'll call it. So what are you doing to deal with that grandfather data that we discussed earlier? How are you validating it for accuracy? You can't tackle everything, but what are the critical elements in the data you already have that you want to save? And what controls can you put in going forward to make sure it is including all of the elements that are critical to your program going on? And then Brian did such a nice job earlier discussing the personal skills that you need, but really you need someone not just in an IT role in this process. You need that business line person, again, because data is more than ones and zeros. It indicates different things, and different facets of the organization may be capturing and using data differently. So you really need to get those business line managers included in there so that they can help paint the full picture of what your data represents and help identify gaps and fill in those connections so that your data can paint the picture it's meant to paint. That being said, there's this big rush and enthusiasm around big data. And I certainly don't want to pause that. There's a lot to be done with it. And a data analytics program will be critical. But I don't want big data to overwhelm. It's called thick data. It may not be a large item, but it's something that is small and resonating and indicative of the future. And it's a term called thick data. And there's this great YouTube presentation by Trisha Wang. I'll certainly send it out to anyone who's interested. And she talks about this term of thick data and how data analytics is really critical and important in looking at the past and making eminent decisions. But right now, data analytics will not help you always identify emerging trends, things that are changing. And her YouTube video or TED Talk discusses Nokia and how Nokia completely missed the mark on smartphones and how popular they were going to be. And how if you are only relying on data analytics and you cut out the component of the human, that you will miss some of these observations. So we need to continue on with this balance of harnessing the power of data, but collaborating it with critical thinking and judgment. And that really just echoes all of the points that Brian was bringing up regarding those two sides, those two people, and making sure that anything we do is educated and adapted as technology and the universe goes on, so that we can make sure we're continuing to pivot and not just relying on the data we have in hand, but looking at data. And that might mean getting data from outside sources. It may be involving in industry discussion. So as Brian said, we just need to make sure this program continues to evolve and stay up to date, and making sure that those business owners and people who are on the ground know what's going on.
Mary, just one thing on that. You keep saying the word foundation. I think it's so apt as well. One thing I think everyone thinks of their data program is, what they're going to do with the data and, what maybe those processes look like, but I don't think they're really that entire foundation, and I know you're going to get to some of that, but those policies, those procedures, those things of, how we need to start storing data, how we need to collect it, they're not, as eye-popping and eye-catching as, some of those reports you can go with the data side, but I think without them, any program is really doomed to at least be inefficient and potentially fail.
Right. I think those numbers that we presented at the beginning, 70, 80, 90% failure rates, they sound shocking. They should be shocking because it's like, we have all this data. We should be able to do something with it. But I can even remember when we did our first internal audits with data analytics, and the items that we ran into that we weren't considering, the access to data, the running down of false positives. There's all these things that muddy up the water and you're just not expecting it. And it's so easy to throw up your hands and just be like, I'm done. This is too hard. I don't get it. So I think your point about, picking off small projects and starting there, get a victory and grow momentum is so important. And that's part of what this diagram is all about. I could probably spend a half hour, an hour talking through all of the different bubbles and things on it. But I want to give you at least a brief introduction about what we're thinking about and how you can successfully really develop a data analytics process. So I know there's a lot going on this slide, but I think these are all critical elements. So on the top, you'll see different stages. And as Brian alluded to, the different stages are where you are and where you're going. So that first stage is really all your fundamental items. It's thinking about where you are today, making sure you have policies and programs in place to guide your path forward. And then once you have that foundational element, stage two is doing some analysis, thoughtfully thinking about where you want to go and setting your ship in the right direction so you can get there. Stage three is where we finally get our hands dirty and start getting things implemented and going forward. And then stage four is kind of that next level true digitalization process, I'd say. Things are up and running and you're now building on those successes. So in addition to the stages across the top, we also have 3 different work streams that I think are important. And I will have to be honest here that we stole this graphic from a larger concept of a whole digital transition process. The data analytics row is the complete work stream. The upper streams are just snippets of those that we thought were important for this process. So this isn't the full diagram, but just wanted to echo the points that were important for this process. So in addition to that data analytics stream, that is really the heart of what we're talking about today. You'll also see the transformation program. There was a lot of internal debate about, is this digitalization? Is it innovation? What is it? And we wanted to leave it broad because as Brian and I have been discussing, this world is continuing to evolve and I don't know what tomorrow brings. So I think these are all elements that you need to be thinking about in order to be ever adapting to the changing world around us. So you'll see a committee to really steer this program forward. And maybe it's not a whole committee, maybe it's an individual at your company, depending on its size and flexibility, but you need someone who's thinking about these things or a group of someone who are thinking about these things. You need to identify a framework for how new projects are going to be evaluated and monitored. And then when you get farther down the process, you need kind of a ticketing system, a request, a suggestion box, somewhere where people can bring their ideas and they're filtered into reality. Now in the data analytics space, this will be for data analytics requests, but this can feed throughout your organization. Also, data and processes are so intertwined that you need to understand your critical elements of your processes, identify if any of those aren't digitized yet and how you can get them more digitized, and then feed that into your data management program. Brian and I have already spent a good amount of today talking about the importance of setting up that foundational element of having a data management strategy. And that includes a policy, internal controls, all those foundational elements. And then hopefully, and depending on what organization or industry you're in, making sure that data is accessible. There are some, financial institutions have had struggles with cores for years in getting access to their data. I'm sure that you're not alone in that issue of either antiquated or harder to use data systems. So really, once you've got your foundational element, you have to make sure you've got your data in a usable format where it can be used and analyzed. And then you need to figure out what tools you're going to use for it. So that selection process is a critical flow. And then once you've got those 2 elements done, you can start with a really nice data analytics pilot. You want to make sure it's something that will be easy to execute and be meaningful. And then once you're able to do that, you can take some lessons learned, revamp the process, and that's really where that ticketing system can come feed in. And you can just continue to grow on your successes. And then that data analytics program, Brian and I being internal auditors, we always start thinking there first, like how can it improve the work we're doing? And there's definitely a lot of wins that can be had in just the standard internal audit work. but it takes thinking about the world differently. I will never forget, I went to a Mass Bankers Internal Audit Society training once, and we were struggling with our data analytics program at that time, and we were really trying to jam data analytics into what we'd been previously doing and having limited success. And this aha moment came out when one of the speakers said, to be successful, you almost need to tear everything down and think about your objectives. These are the risks I'm trying to identify. I'm going to come data first and fill in what I can with that. And then I'm going to back support with all the old things that I was doing for anything that's not covered. And I really would encourage everyone who is starting a data analytics program that really wants to see big successes. They've got their tools, they've got some wins under their belt, but they're looking to take the next step. That would be what I would encourage you to do, is to knock the house down and rebuild it with a data first mentality. So I'm so happy that you joined us today. It was delightful talking about data analytics. I think I could talk about it all day. I know we went through this at a high level, but if anyone would like to continue the conversation or has any questions about what they heard here today, this is our contact information. We would love to talk to you more. Have a wonderful day.